going to go get an implant soon. And they told me that they're going to use PRP, which is spinning out my blood. And then because it's a staged process, they're going to first they got to cut my gum, then drill the hole. The tooth is already gone, the bad tooth, then drill the hole. And then they're going to put my being, essentially a blood clot, over the wound and then suture it to let it heal. I'm giving you, again, the Flintstone version of this. But they used to use, before this came about, some sort of synthetic material to help the healing, but it had to be retrieved. So I think it's the same basic thing. It's always better to use that person's
biology.
Yeah.
And the reason being, so think about, you've heard, of course, of people needing to have a bone marrow transplant because they get a blood cancer.
Yes.
And in that instance, if someone does that, they have to find someone who's a match, an HLA match. And it could be a relative, it could be a stranger. But even if you have a 100% match with someone, there is still a 50% rejection rate. And the reason being is your body, your immune system sees these new cells as foreign and tries to eliminate them from the body, and you get graft versus host. And oftentimes that's actually what kills the cancer patient. Wow. Not the cancer, it's graft versus host. That's why it's really important to have your own biology set aside. So if let's say, God forbid, 10 years from now, you get a blood cancer, you have your own young Michael cell set aside, you could potentially be your own donor in that situation. So I can't overstate how important what we are doing is. I think it's a no-brainer, but a lot of people have a hard time getting past the medical procedure. They think it's going to be very painful,
right?
And it really is not.
So a little wrinkle in what I thought was going to be the plan, because Renee got her stem cells collected a couple years ago, and then within 2 years, she's going to need them again, but she couldn't get them from her own stem cell bank for some reason. Do you know about this?
Yeah, so right now in the United States, the FDA won't allow you to take stem cells. So we're banking them at Forever Labs, right? And the idea is we want to use these cells. And you can, if it's a life-threatening condition, there's this law called right to treat, which will allow a physician to use a medical procedure that they deem safe and reasonable to treat that life-threatening condition. So, but if you want to use it for like the hip or something like that, right now, outside of an approved FDA trial, you're not able to use them. There's the rule essentially states that once these cells leave your body and leave the clinic and are frozen, they're regulated like a drug. Even though it's your biology and likely to be very, very safe, they're regulated like a drug. And right now there are approvals in other countries, but not yet in the United States to do that. So there's approvals in Canada, Japan, the EU. It's coming, but we're not quite there yet.
So this is another element of time travel, because we think everything comes in place at the same time, but legislature doesn't work like that. Education of the legislature doesn't work like that. The laws have to become voted. We just finished up with COVID, and people were frustrated, why can't we get our kids vaccines? It's because time has to pass in order to do enough science, in this case, a number of experiments, to prove that they're safe. And you can't rush those along, right? It's a time sequence. It's all spelled out. You might become frustrated with the length of time that it takes these people to get their shit together. But you're quite confident that it's coming, that somebody like Renee could get her stem cells back if it was not a life-threatening situation.
Yeah, I think it is coming. I can't make any promises, but this is my prediction. A lot of times what happens is there's off-label usage of certain medical procedures, et cetera. For example, you mentioned PRP of the gums that you're doing. The PRP devices, these machines, they have 510K clearance from the FDA. They have 510K clearance from the FDA to be used in bone grafting. That's it. Like there is no 510K clearance for gum use or 510K clearance for using PRP in joints and knees. This is off-label usage by physicians. And it's largely established that that's okay. And they're not doing anything. I mean, these are major institutions. Like I guarantee think of Duke hospital is doing this. Everyone's using PRP right now. But that's just kind of the way it works, off-label usage. What I think is going to happen with autologous stem cell treatments is that there's likely to be something like osteoarthritis of the knee, or maybe osteopenia. Osteopenia, that's a good example. Osteopenia is a loss of bone density with age, right? The older you get, the less bone density you have. Your bones get brittle. It's being shown that if you reintroduce these stem cells, it does increase bone density.
Oh.
And so you get an approval for osteopenia. Well, it's something everyone has. Everyone's going to have with age. And so it sort of opens a door for procedures using these cells prophylactically. So I'm really rooting for that. It's because the day that we have that approval, we can start reintroducing these cells to treat osteopenia. But one of the byproducts of reintroducing these young MSCs, at least in animal models, is that they live longer, significantly so. So, I mean, it's why we started the company, actually. If you want to hear that story, it's pretty cool. So my co-founder is a guy named Dr. Mark Katakowski. Mark's phenomenal. He's been studying stem cells for like 30 years. And he was at Henry Ford Hospital in Detroit, Michigan for 20 years, studying various neuropathologies like stroke and TBI, using stem cells to treat these injuries in mice, basically. And what he started to see is, like, when he treated old mice that had a stroke with cells from younger mice that were genetically matched, not only did they heal faster, but they seemed to live longer than the control group. So Mark became convinced that having access to his own young stem cells was going to matter. And he called me up on the phone one night, very good friends, and he started telling me about this. And by the end of the phone call, I was like, man, I want to store my stem cells too. Let's do this. So we started to try to find a company that would store our stem cells for us, and it didn't exist.
What year was this?
This is, I want to say 2015, 2015. And then I reached out to a friend of mine who's an orthopedic surgeon, great doctor in Brighton, Michigan, actually, named Dr. Laith Farjo. And I said, hey, Laith, I got a strange question. Would you take out my bone marrow and my friend's bone marrow? And he was like, it's not that strange. I do it all the time. To your point, things like Renee, right? And then he said something that made the entrepreneur light bulb go off. He said, and a lot of people are asking me if they can store some for later. And then I realized, well, maybe there are other people as crazy as me and Mark that would want to have this done, as you refer to us as early adopters, right? And so we started the company in Ann Arbor, Michigan. And before we knew it, like, people from San Francisco started flying in, mostly from SF, to Michigan to bank their stem cells with us and Dr. Farjo.
Why SF?
Very, very progressive, very forward-thinking futurist, a lot of futurists. So, there's no surprise to me that that's where all the new technology is born, and where, cryptocurrency, all this new stuff that's coming, it's largely in the Bay Area that it's being dreamed up, thought up, and built.
Did they ask you if you accept crypto for payment?
No, we have had people ask that. I mean, yes, absolutely. And I am not opposed to it. So we had all these people flying out there, and then one of them invited us out to his big place out in San Francisco to give a talk. And Mark went and gave a talk out there, and it became evident that we needed to have a doctor in San Francisco. We brought one on board there, and all these tech CEOs started signing up, and we got asked to join this thing called Y Combinator, which is a tech accelerator out of San Francisco that has spawned companies like Airbnb, Dropbox, Reddit, Stripe, DoorDash, wow, Instacart, like all these big companies. And we went through that program and got funded, and now we're in 20 states and off to the races. But it all started because Mark noticed when he was trying to study these mice that they were living longer than the control group. There are subsequent studies of people that were studying osteopenia in mice too, and saw that not only did it increase their bone density, but they lived like 30% longer than the control group with young MSC reintroduction. So imagine that. Like, imagine if you could start reintroducing young Michael's cells on a schedule and live 30% longer, not in a decrepit state, but in a healthy and vibrant state. I mean, it's really exciting. It's very exciting. But the thing is, like,
mice wouldn't have so much osteoporosis if they did more weight training.
Yeah, that's true too. Yeah. Hey, look, I just started getting into that. I just started lifting weights like a month ago, and I feel great.